Have you noticed the silence after the storm? Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that feels alive, charged, trembling, sacred. Heaven itself has gone quiet because your name is being spoken in the courts of eternity. Chosen one, what you've just come through wasn't ordinary. The war you fought wasn't just emotional or mental, it was cosmic. Angels recorded every tear as testimony. The heavens kept score, not by your strength, but by your endurance. And now, the scrolls of your story are being unsealed before the throne of God, revealing how you did what hell swore you couldn't. This isn't a random message. You didn't stumble into this word. You were summoned here by design. Heaven scheduled this moment to tell you the truth. You didn't lose, you shifted dimensions. While others saw defeat, heaven saw transformation. While they counted your scars, God counted your surrender. Do you remember those nights when you could barely breathe? The days when silence felt like punishment? You thought heaven had turned away, but heaven was building a warrior. You prayed for peace, but God gave you power. You begged for release, but He was training your hands for war. Every time you chose to forgive instead of fight back, light broke out in realms unseen. Every time you worshipped through pain, your spirit grew sharper than the swords raised against you. Your tears became oil, anointing you for the authority you now carry. You didn't just fight back, you fought through, and that's what made your battle legendary. And now, heaven decrees. The war is finished. The verdict is victory. The dust is settling, but your name echoes in the spirit, not as a survivor, but as a sign. The same voices that doubted you are now whispering your name in awe. You've become a living prophecy, proof that divine resilience outlasts every plan of the enemy. Chosen one, you are heaven's evidence that faith still wins. You carry the fragrance of triumph, the glow of someone who's walked through fire and comes out refined, not burned. This isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of your legacy. The old cycle has closed. A new anointing has been released over your life. So before we go deeper, seal this revelation in your spirit. Type 777 inches, the comments, as your prophetic act of victory. Like this video as your public declaration that you made it. Share it with another chosen one who's still in their battle. Let them see what divine recovery looks like. And stay until the end, because the revelation that follows will show you exactly how heaven rewrote your defeat into destiny. This is not just a message, it's a revelation written for your soul. God's chosen ones, your battle was legendary. Here's how you won. There was a time when the world thought they had you all figured out. They studied your emotions like a map, tracing the edges of your vulnerabilities as if they were coordinates leading to control. They spoke your name not in reverence, but in calculation, assuming they could summon your reaction like a predictable storm. They thought they knew the rhythm of your heartbeat, the pattern of your anger, the sound of your breaking. But they never expected what heaven had already been preparing within you. A mind sharpened by divine strategy and a spirit steadied by sacred restraint. Because you, chosen one, were never meant to stay where they left you. Your silence was not weakness, it was sacred incubation. When they pushed your buttons and waited for the explosion, heaven whispered instead, "Be still and know that I am God." Psalm 46:10. You stopped playing the old game the moment you realized you were never meant to be a piece on their board. You were the architect of a whole new battlefield, one where wisdom replaced reaction and discernment silenced chaos. They talked because they couldn't understand why you no longer bled from the same words that used to wound you. They mistook your peace for passivity, not realizing that peace is the most devastating weapon in the arsenal of the anointed. It disarms every manipulator, confuses every schemer, and exposes every false motive. You learned that emotional mastery is not detachment, it's dominion. For every wound you endured, God built a wall of discernment. Each betrayal became a blueprint. Each misunderstanding became material for your inner fortress. The old you would have responded to every false narrative, defended every lie, and tried to prove your worth to those who never intended to understand it. But the new you, the reborn you, moves like a whisper carrying thunder. Your restraint carries more power than your outburst ever did. And perhaps that is what shook them most. Your evolution into stillness. The same way the sea withdraws before releasing a wave, you learn to retreat into divine perspective before advancing. You became like the cathedral builders of the Renaissance, constructing your internal architecture with patience, precision, and purpose. The world may not see the scaffolding, but heaven does. Every choice to hold your peace was a stone set in the foundation of your destiny. As the artist Caravaggio once said, "There is no light without shadow." You discovered that truth in your journey. For in your shadows, the grief, the silence, the misunderstood seasons, light was forming shape. God wasn't just teaching you to endure, He was teaching you to see. You began to discern the sacred pattern behind the chaos, the divine order within disorder. What once felt like punishment became revelation. And so they kept talking. But what were they really talking about? Your past? No, they were talking about their confusion. How could someone they once destabilized now walk in such measured grace? How could someone who used to tremble now carry peace that unsettles rooms? They were not gossiping about your history, they were studying your upgrade. They saw evolution and mistook it for mystery. There is something holy about quiet growth. Scripture says, "The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows it becomes the largest of garden plants." Matthew 13:31-32. Your transformation was that seed, hidden, unassuming, yet destined to alter the landscape of everything around you. That is why heaven kept you secluded for a time. Your isolation wasn't rejection, it was refinement. When you stopped defending yourself, heaven started defending you. When you stopped reacting, heaven began rearranging. That's when divine justice entered, not loud, not vengeful, but precise. Because your silence carried prophetic weight. Have you noticed how peace unsettles those who thrive on confusion? Have you seen how your calm presence now exposes every hidden agenda? Have you realized that what once broke you now bows before you? When you stopped fighting for recognition, your presence became revelation. That is the paradox of divine growth. The less you strive to be seen, the more the light finds you. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Isaiah 60:1. You didn't announce your transformation, heaven did. From a psychological lens, your shift mirrors a principle of quantum resonance. Frequencies cannot remain in conflict forever. Eventually, the higher one recalibrates the lower. That's what your spirit did. You began vibrating at a frequency of wisdom so high that pettiness could no longer reach you. Every time you chose stillness over argument, the energy of your environment shifted. You became the tuning fork of heaven, aligning chaos into harmony simply by existing in truth. I once thought strength meant confrontation, but watching souls like yours taught me something deeper. True power is precision. Anyone can react. Only the evolved can discern when not to. This realization altered my own journey. I learned that maturity isn't losing fire, it's learning to direct it toward purpose. And you, chosen one, are now walking proof that discipline is the language of destiny. Your transformation was never about revenge, it was about revelation. They expected fire, you gave them focus. They expected a storm, you brought stillness. Like in the story of Jesus calming the winds, "Peace, be still," Mark 4:39, you became the calm that silences every tempest. And that's why they talked, because they couldn't recognize you anymore. The version of you they rehearsed to manipulate had disappeared, and what stood in your place was a being of sacred composure. And, as they talk, heaven smiles. Because this was the prophecy all along. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. You didn't win by reacting. You won by remembering who you are. Now you walk differently. You move with the rhythm of the divine architect who designed your steps long before the world tried to misinterpret them. Every decision you make now carries a quiet authority, the kind that shifts atmospheres without shouting. That is the mark of someone chosen not just to survive, but to teach through presence. And perhaps, in the sacred symmetry of this story, the greatest victory wasn't that you silenced your critics, but that you silenced your inner chaos. For that is where every true battle is won. You have become a living psalm, not just read, but felt. The echo of your restraint still moves through unseen realms. The heavenly record now bears the truth of your evolution. You didn't just respond differently. You became different. So, let the world talk. Let them wonder. Because every whisper about you is proof that transformation leaves evidence. And when heaven writes your story, it doesn't need defense, it needs witnesses. And to you who hear these words, share the wisdom that found you in the quiet. Share the moment when you realized peace was power. Somewhere, another chosen one is still learning how to stop reacting and start reigning, and your story might be their confirmation. There is something sacred about defiance when it is guided by heaven. You, the chosen one, made history not by doing what they expected, but by refusing to play a role written by human hands. People love writing stories about others. They construct entire narratives in their minds: who you are, what you'll become, where you'll fail, and when you'll fade. They write assumptions as if they were prophecies. They mistake their imagination for insight. They assign you a destiny that fits their comfort, not your calling. They studied your past as if it were your prophecy. They marked your moments of weakness like punctuation, deciding where your story should end. They placed invisible ceilings above you, labeling them realistic expectations. But what they never understood is that you were never theirs to define. Heaven had already penned your name into a greater manuscript, one that no human editor could revise. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. Jeremiah 1-5. Your life was never a public draft. It was a divine original. And that's what startled them, your refusal to follow the script they rehearsed for you. You did not crumble in the chapter they wrote as your downfall. You didn't cry on cue when betrayal entered the scene. You didn't surrender in the act they titled The End. Instead, you quietly took the pen back and began to write a new story while they were still clinging to the old plot. You stepped out of the pages they tried to confine you in, and suddenly, the author they thought they were became the audience of your redemption. That moment when you rewrote your fate was not rebellion, it was a revelation. Because you finally realized that destiny is not something you inherit from people's opinions, it's something you awaken within yourself. You made history because you remembered who wrote you. You stopped being a character and became a creator. You stopped existing as someone's expectation and began evolving as God's expression. How many times did they whisper about your limits, not knowing you were learning how to transcend them? How many times did they predict your failure, not realizing their doubt was the soil for your breakthrough? And how many times did they call you finished, unaware that resurrection was your signature move? When they boxed you in, you discovered the architecture of the infinite. You learned that boundaries created by others are only illusions until faith decides to walk through them. Just like Peter stepping out of the boat, Matthew 14:29, you took one step into uncertainty, and suddenly the water beneath you recognized your authority. That's how miracles happen, not through comfort, but through holy contradiction. You see, they expected you to repeat what you came from. They expected the old cycles to reclaim you, the generational silence, the emotional exhaustion, the inherited resignation. But you became the interruption in the bloodline. You made history not because you shouted louder, but because you healed deeper. You refused to let the story of what has always been decide what will always be. That's legacy redefined. That's what heaven calls holy rebellion. As I reflect on souls like yours, I realize something profound. Sometimes, divine rebellion is simply alignment in disguise. It's not defiance against order, it's obedience to a higher one. You didn't fight against destiny, you fought for it. You didn't walk away from your purpose, you walked away from their version of it. That distinction alone is what separates those who conform from those who are called. There's a phrase once written by the playwright Antonin Artaud: "No one has ever written, painted, sculpted, modeled, built, or invented except literally to get out of hell." You did exactly that. You built your freedom one decision at a time. You escaped the inferno of other people's narratives through the architecture of your own becoming. Like a divine architect restoring ancient ruins, you redesigned your soul's cathedral with columns of faith, patience, and purpose. In that sacred reconstruction, you encountered the God who never saw you as broken, only unfinished. That's why he allowed certain doors to close. That's why some relationships had to end. The script others wrote for you could never contain the magnitude of the version heaven had in mind. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord, "plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope." Jeremiah 29-11. You stopped performing in the theater of their expectations the day you realized your stage was eternity. And when you made that choice, time itself shifted, the cycle broke. The ancestral echoes that whispered, "This is how it's always been," suddenly went silent. Because the moment one chosen one awakens, entire bloodlines remember freedom. You didn't just change your life, you altered the frequency of generations. Just as in physics, when one tuning fork begins to vibrate, others nearby resonate with it. Your transformation sends waves through unseen dimensions. You became heaven's resonance in human form. They mistook your silence for surrender, your stillness for apathy, your patience for weakness. But what they couldn't see was the quiet fire being refined in your waiting. You weren't inactive, you were incubating. Every hidden moment was divine preparation. You were writing chapters they couldn't read because they weren't meant to. Some stories are sacred. They unfold in secrecy until heaven says, "Release." No. And now, here you are, living proof that destiny is not a prediction but a partnership. You are walking in the paradox of grace and grit. The angels are not applauding your perfection, but your perseverance. You are the embodiment of Isaiah 43-19. "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" You perceived it. That's why you moved differently. You refused the script because you sensed the shift. What if the true purpose of every limitation was simply to awaken your authorship? What if every person who doubted you was actually an editor sent to teach you to write without permission? And what if the ending they feared was only the prologue of your eternity? History remembers those who create meaning where others see misfortune. You are not just surviving a story, you are revising creation itself through the choices you make in alignment with the divine. You are proof that prophecy isn't about predicting what will happen, but partnering with heaven to become what was promised. As I speak these words, there's a holy stillness hovering, that sacred moment when heaven nods because someone finally remembered who they are. You made history not because of how loudly you fought, but because of how faithfully you refused to fit. And that is what terrifies the predictable, those who realize they were never written by human ink. So, walk now, chosen one, in your unscripted truth. Live like poetry written by God's own hand. Let the world watch in confusion as you rise from every chapter they buried you in. Because when heaven authors your life, even the plot twists become prophecies. And when this message reaches those who feel trapped in someone else's story, remind them that pens still exist, and so does grace. Tell them their script is not final, only paused. Invite them to write again. There's a sound that follows every awakening, the sound of resistance echoing from those who refuse to rise. You, the chosen one, heard it too. It came in the form of gossip, projections, exaggerated stories, and half-truths paraded as insight. They were loud not because they had something real to say, but because your silence reminded them of everything they've avoided becoming. They spoke because your growth made noise inside of them, a sound they didn't know how to quiet. The truth no one likes to confess is that people become uneasy when the one they underestimated ascends beyond the limits they imposed. It's humbling to see a stranger rise, but it's unnerving to watch someone you once pitied surpass you with grace. Your evolution became their exposure. You didn't plan it that way. You were just trying to heal. But healing has a frequency. It vibrates through the atmosphere like a bell in a cathedral, and everything not in tune with it begins to tremble. While you were ascending into awareness, they were looping through the same excuses, the same habits, the same narratives that kept them safely small. You began to walk in renewal. They clung to repetition. Your peace became a mirror. And not everyone survives the truth reflected back to them. For everyone practicing evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. John 3:20. That verse was never about condemnation, it was about contrast. When light appears, shadows reveal their edges. You didn't expose them by calling names, you exposed them simply by shining. While you were expanding, they were rehearsing old stories about you, trying to contain your new reality within an outdated frame. But that's what evolution does. It refuses to fit back into the containers that once held it. You outgrew the emotional architecture that used to define you. You stopped apologizing for evolving beyond their comfort zone. Your rise made them restless because it whispered something terrifying into their souls. You could have changed too. That awareness feels like fire to those who prefer cold comfort. So, they talked loudly, excessively, dramatically to drown out the inner voice asking, "What have I done with my time?" Every time you ascended a new level, they built a rumor to feel taller. But gossip is just gravity wearing perfume. It smells strong, but it only pulls things down. I've learned something sacred in watching people like you grow. Transformation exposes stagnation, not out of arrogance, but out of reflection. When one soul evolves, everyone around it must either rise or retreat. That spiritual physics resonance demands response. Just as sound waves amplify when they meet a surface of equal vibration, the awakened heart magnifies the truth in its environment. Your evolution didn't embarrass them, it awakened them, and awakening can feel like shame to those not ready for self-honesty. They saw in you the courage they once abandoned. They saw in your growth the blueprint they never followed. And rather than confront the distance between who they are and who they could be, they made you their scapegoat of distraction. It's always easier to analyze someone else's transformation than to admit your own resistance. It's simpler to critique than to create, and it's far more comfortable to gossip about light than to walk toward it. They turned your story into their sermon because silence would have forced them to face the altar of their own potential. But you kept walking. You didn't defend yourself because truth doesn't debate. You didn't retaliate because elevation and explanation don't speak the same language. You understood that people who live in noise are allergic to clarity. Do you realize how many storms never reach you anymore simply because you stopped responding to thunder? Do you see how every whisper about you only confirms how visible your progress has become? Do you feel how light carries its own protection, not by hiding, but by transforming everything it touches? As your presence grew, so did their discomfort. It's not envy that burns them, it's recognition. Deep down, they know your evolution proves that excuses are optional. They've seen the same pain you endured. They had the same 24 hours, but where they paused, you persevered. Where they recycled hurt, you recycled wisdom. That difference doesn't make you better, it makes you accountable to what you've become. And that accountability carries weight. To whom much is given, much will be required. Luke 12:48. You've been entrusted with growth, not just for you, but for the ones who still believe they can't change. Your progress is a prophecy in motion. It says, it's still possible. And heaven smiles because your very existence now challenges the stagnation of others. The composer Gustav Mahler once said, "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire." You, chosen one, preserved the fire. You didn't worship what once was. You protected the light of what could be. Your consistency became artistry. Your perseverance became a symphony. You became the living music of renewal. And like every symphony, not everyone hears it the same way. Some only notice the silence between your notes and call it emptiness. Others hear the crescendo of your resilience and call it arrogance. But heaven hears the harmony of obedience, the sound of a life that refused to repeat. While they spoke loudly to drown out their stagnation, you spoke softly to nurture your transformation. You realized that noise doesn't equal movement. That's the divine paradox. Evolution often sounds like silence. The butterfly doesn't announce its metamorphosis. The seed doesn't broadcast its sprouting. Yet both alter the landscape forever. Your healing made them restless. Your boundaries made them bewildered. Your calmness made them question everything. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. You were the stone they once dismissed. Now you are part of the foundation that reveals their cracks. So let them talk. Their words are only proof of what their hearts cannot silence. You didn't expose them because you tried to. Your existence did it naturally. Growth is the mirror that never lies. And when that mirror shows stagnation, people either change or criticize the reflection. You made them face a question they can't unhear. If you could evolve, what's my excuse? That's why the noise hasn't stopped, not because of your flaws, but because of their fear. The fear that they, too, could rise if they stopped resisting the call of transformation. And as you read these words, take comfort in this truth. Your peace is your protection, and your growth is your gospel. You don't need to prove who you've become. You are already preaching it through presence. Your evolution isn't a performance, it's a prophecy fulfilled. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the way you've evolved. You only owe heaven your continued obedience to that light. So, keep shining. Let the noise fade into insignificance. You have become the evidence that grace grows, that silence heals, and that transformation speaks louder than gossip ever could. And to every soul listening, tell your own story before others rewrite it for you. The world needs your evolution, not your explanation. They thought your silence meant surrender, but heaven knew better. What they couldn't see was that your quiet was a battleground, a sacred laboratory where the old self dissolved and the divine blueprint began to breathe. This was not a weakness. This was warfare on holy frequencies. You, the chosen one, didn't fight back with noise, confrontation, or revenge. You fought back with transformation. While others were expecting fireworks, heaven was watching the miracle of your internal realignment. You changed your inner ecosystem, and their influence, once thriving in your unhealed soil, could no longer survive the new climate. That was your silent warfare. Have you ever wondered how much strength it takes to remain still while everything inside you is transforming? Your greatest comeback didn't happen in front of an audience. It wasn't broadcasted on screens or captured in applause. It happened in the hidden chambers of your soul, the quiet rooms where truth whispers and pride dies. You stopped wrestling with people and began wrestling with patterns. You realized that the real enemy was not external. It was the echo of old pain still calling for permission to stay. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers. Ephesians 6:12. You understood that Scripture not as metaphor, but as experience. You stopped battling faces and began dismantling fortresses within your mind. Every time you confront an insecurity, a need for validation, or a lingering wound, a spiritual stronghold falls. Your healing became your sword. In that sacred solitude, you faced the hardest opponent you'd ever meet, the version of yourself that still believed you needed to be chosen by others to feel worthy. You went to war with the part of you that mistook people's approval for peace, and every victory was invisible but eternal. There were nights when silence felt like suffocation, but heaven was tuning you to a new frequency, one where chaos couldn't reach. You were being recalibrated, not punished. Just as the body resets during sleep, your spirit is undergoing a quiet regeneration. You started addressing the wounds that made you over-explain. You dealt with the insecurities that made you tolerate less than you deserve. You faced the traumas that made you shrink in rooms you were born to lead. And one by one, you sealed the entry points. They didn't lose power because they apologized. They lost power because you healed. They lost access because you changed the locks. You stopped seeking closure and became closure. When you strengthened your boundaries, their manipulation could no longer find purchase. When you mastered your emotions, their provocations became static noise. They spoke the same words, but you no longer resonated on that frequency. You didn't argue your worth, you embodied it. You didn't demand respect, you radiated it. You didn't announce your healing, you lived it so clearly that the atmosphere shifted when you entered a room. That's how heaven fights, through quiet authority. Your transformation was not theatrical, it was architectural. You rebuilt your inner world from the foundation up, brick by sacred brick. Every prayer was a stone. Every moment of restraint was mortar. Every act of forgiveness was an archway opening into freedom. You became the temple you once sought refuge in. As I reflect on this kind of evolution, I see what the mystics always meant when they said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Luke 17:21. You discovered that truth in the most practical, painful way, by learning that peace isn't the absence of war, but the mastery of reaction. Have you noticed how still water reflects the sky perfectly, while turbulent waves distort it? That's what your healing did. It calmed the inner waters, so heaven could see its reflection in you again. In the language of physics, this is called homeostasis, a system's ability to self-regulate and maintain balance amidst change. Spiritually, you did the same. You rebalanced the temperature of your soul. You became so aligned internally that anything not vibrating in truth naturally fell away. Their influence didn't fade because you fought harder. It faded because it couldn't breathe in your new atmosphere. That's the mystery of divine self-mastery. What stops you from feeding the hungry? When you stopped feeding your pain with attention, it withered. When you stopped feeding their chaos with reaction, it collapsed. When you stopped feeding your fears with imagination, they lost form. And this was your quiet revolution. They thought they could still reach you with old tactics. They came with guilt, gossip, manipulation, projection, but those doors were welded shut. You had melted the hinges through awareness. Their keys didn't fit anymore because the locks were love now, not longing. I once believed healing was about escape, but I've learned it's about expansion. You didn't run away from their power, you expanded beyond its reach. You rose to a dimension where their energy couldn't survive. Like an eagle soaring above the storm, you found altitude instead of argument. That is a divine strategy. That is silent warfare. Have you felt that sacred moment when you realize peace itself is a weapon and calmness can conquer what chaos never could? The philosopher Rumi once wrote, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." You started speaking that language fluently. Every quiet decision became a declaration in heaven's tongue. You no longer needed to shout because your peace spoke louder than words ever could. You became evidence that transformation is the only argument truth needs. And that's why they couldn't recognize you anymore. The version of you they trained to manipulate was gone. The emotional reflexes they depended on were replaced by discernment. The insecurities they exploited were replaced by identity. They weren't battling you, they were battling your upgrade. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, Romans 12:2. You lived that verse until it breathed inside you. Renewal became your rebellion. Stillness became your strategy. Every boundary you built was a banner of freedom raised silently in heaven's sight. You didn't just change your habits, you changed your habitat. You shifted the spiritual weather around you. You altered the magnetic field of your being until only peace could orbit close. The people who once thrived in your chaos found themselves suffocating in your calm. That's what happens when a soul ascends the air for anything not meant to rise with it. So don't mourn the silence that follows your healing. It's not loneliness, it's atmosphere correction. You are breathing the rarefied air of wholeness now. You fought back without fists, without noise, without spectacle. You fought by becoming untouchable through peace. Your silence wasn't absence, it was ascension. And in that holy quiet, God whispered what the world will one day understand. This is how victory sounds. There comes a sacred moment in every chosen one's journey when pain stops being a prison and becomes a professor. That was your turning point. You made history not because you escaped trauma, but because you decoded it. You stopped living as a casualty and began living as a researcher of your own soul. You turned suffering into sacred science, the study of yourself under divine light. What set you apart wasn't that you went through pain everyone does. What made your rise historic was how you processed it. You didn't let your trauma become the author of your story. You made it a source footnote in the thesis of your awakening. Have you realized that revelation often hides inside repetition, the same pain replayed until you finally read it instead of reliving it? Most people take their trauma and wear it like a permanent badge. They replay the same events for years, allowing pain to become identity and identity to become prison. They justify bitterness because it feels familiar. But you refused to wear your wounds as personality traits. You decided your heartbreak wouldn't become your handwriting. You looked at your trauma differently. Instead of letting it define you, you studied it. You dissected pain the way a philosopher examines paradox with reverence and curiosity. You treated each ache as data, not destiny. You watched your triggers like constellations, charting them until you understood their orbits. You asked not, "Why did this happen to me?" but "What is this trying to reveal through me?" In that shift, heaven smiled, because wisdom always begins when observation replaces obsession. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. You stopped clinging to the story and began extracting the science. Each time a memory resurfaced, you didn't drown in it, you dove through it. You studied the anatomy of your reactions. You learned what provoked you, what drained you, and what healed you. You became your own spiritual anthropologist, exploring the ruins of past pain and uncovering divine architecture beneath the rubble. You didn't suppress your emotions, you interrogated them. You discovered that emotions are messengers, not masters. They point to needs that words cannot express. That awareness became your compass. While others kept asking, "Why me?" you were already asking, "What now?" The book of Proverbs says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Proverbs 4:23. You took that literally. You learned where your boundaries leaked, where your compassion bled too freely, where your empathy became entanglement. You turned self-awareness into sacred armor. And in doing so, you rendered manipulation powerless. There's an elegance to your growth, not loud, not performative, but deeply analytical, quietly holy. You began connecting dots others never noticed. You realized that betrayal taught discernment, disappointment taught detachment, silence taught strategy. Every heartbreak became an equation, every loss a lesson in energy. You became fluent in the mathematics of meaning. Have you ever noticed how pain repeats itself until it's understood? That is heaven's feedback loop, divine data cycling until awareness closes the pattern. You broke the loop. You stopped labeling yourself as the wounded one and began operating as the wise one. That shift was your resurrection. Pain became your textbook, not your title. You studied it until it no longer scared you. You learned that the human heart is both fragile and formulaic. It breaks in patterns, but it also heals in principles. Once you grasped the principle, the wound lost its power. You began to realize what many never will, that trauma is not the event, it's the meaning attached to it. Change the meaning, and you change the memory. You rewrote the neural script through mindfulness, faith, and forgiveness. You practiced the spiritual neuroscience of renewal, what Romans 12:2 calls the renewing of the mind. And something magnificent happened. Your mind began upgrading faster than your memories could pull you back. You became too conscious to repeat what once controlled you. You outgrew the frequency of victimhood. Their old tactics could no longer reach you because your self-awareness had raised the walls and windows of your inner temple. The painter Frida Kahlo once wrote, "I never paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality." You did the same. You stopped escaping pain through fantasy and began sculpting it into purpose. You stopped painting wounds, you painted wisdom, you created art from ashes. Each scar became scripture, evidence of lessons learned in silence. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, Psalm 147:3. Healing wasn't passive anymore, you partnered with it. You became a co-author with the divine healer, writing new meaning into your history. In psychology, this is called post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where adversity enhances awareness, resilience, and purpose. Spiritually, it's what Joseph meant when he said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50:20. You became living proof that trauma can be transformed into technology, the kind that builds emotional intelligence and spiritual discernment simultaneously. Have you felt the quiet triumph of realizing the thing that hurt you most has now become your highest teacher? That is what it means to turn pain into prophecy. You stopped reacting to what wounded you and started researching it until it could no longer manipulate your emotions. And so, you made history, not because you survived, but because you studied survival and evolved its science. You became an alchemist of the unseen, turning fear into data, heartbreak into hypothesis, and disappointment into design. You didn't run from your darkness, you audited it. You became fluent in the language of transformation. Your life stopped being a tragedy and became a thesis, each scar a citation, each healing a footnote of grace. And when you finally reached understanding, the pain no longer controlled you because it had served its purpose. You didn't just move on, you moved upward. You now walk with an awareness that most people avoid, not cynical, but crystalline. You see cause where others see coincidence. You see cycles where others see chaos. That's prophetic intelligence, the ability to discern patterns in what others call pain. And this is why you stand where others stay stuck. They lived in their trauma, you learned from yours, and that changed everything. The final verse belongs to you. Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy, Psalm 126:5. You didn't just survive the sorrow, you harvested the revelation. That is why heaven calls you historic. What shocked them wasn't your comeback. It was your refusal to return to the version of yourself they felt comfortable defeating. The real disruption wasn't that you rose, it's that you never shrank back down. They were ready to face the you they once controlled, the reactive one, the apologetic one, the one who mistook chaos for connection. But that version of you was buried long before your public resurrection. Have you ever seen the look of confusion on someone's face when they realize their favorite weapon no longer works? That was the look they carried when they met the new you, the version refined by silence, shaped by solitude, and crowned by discernment. They rehearsed arguments for a person who no longer existed. They designed strategies for a mindset you outgrew. They built their confidence on the assumption that you would never evolve beyond the insecurities they once exploited. But when you reappeared, sharper and calmer, anchored instead of agitated, you became an anomaly. You were no longer predictable, you were prophetic. The battlefield they trained for was gone, transformed into sacred ground. Their scripts, their tactics, their triggers, all obsolete in the light of who you've become. You weren't fighting for dominance anymore, you were maintaining peace. That shift alone disrupted every system that relied on your chaos. It wasn't arrogance, it was awareness. You simply stopped living in the emotional climate where they built their power. Their confidence had been weather-dependent, it only worked when you reigned. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, says Isaiah 54:17, and you finally understood that it wasn't a promise of absence, but of inefficacy. The weapons still formed, but they no longer functioned. You didn't just evolve. You became unrecognizable to those who preferred your weakness. They tried to summon the old you through guilt, nostalgia, manipulation, or rumor, but every attempt echoed against a wall of new strength. You weren't avoiding them, you were operating on another frequency. The air changed around you, and they couldn't breathe in it. They wanted the version of you who explained too much, who apologized for existing, who mistook loyalty for self-abandonment. They wanted the version of you who reacted fast, felt deeply, and carried wounds like proof of love. But you came back whole, and wholeness is disarming to those who thrive on half-truths. Have you noticed how silence becomes intimidating when it no longer hides fear but carries authority? That's why they grew uneasy around your calm. You no longer flinched when provoked, and that made their confidence collapse. You no longer argued to be understood, and that made their words meaningless. They realized too late that they weren't losing to your comeback, they were losing to your transformation. Because transformation rewrites the battlefield. You didn't just outgrow people, you outgrew patterns. You learned that growth doesn't always mean climbing higher. Sometimes it means standing so still that others can no longer find you in the same chaos. You didn't need to announce your upgrade, your energy did it for you. Scripture says, "When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I became an adult, I put childish ways behind me." 1 Corinthians 13:11. You lived that evolution in spirit. You didn't just mature emotionally, you ascended spiritually. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward." Looking back now, you see the genius of your own journey, how every breakdown was a prelude to brilliance. You understand that your old self wasn't your enemy, it was your initiation. In psychology, this stage is called integration, when all previous versions of you unite under wisdom's leadership. Spiritually, it's resurrection. The old has gone, the new has come, 2 Corinthians 5:17. You didn't just change your reactions, you changed your entire resonance. The frequencies of fear and approval no longer register in your atmosphere. Your peace became your perimeter. Your discernment became your defense. You no longer had to hide from attacks because attacks can't land where chaos has no coordinates. You became what warriors in silence always become: untouchable, not because you fight harder, but because you vibrate higher. Have you ever felt the serenity of realizing that being misunderstood is no longer your concern? That's the mark of spiritual graduation. You learned that some battles end not by victory, but by transcendence. You didn't need to prove your power, you simply became a place where conflict can't survive. Those who once felt tall by standing over you now feel small beside your peace. They were not prepared for this version of you, the one who listens before speaking, who prays before reacting, who discerns before deciding. Their tactics failed because their target evolved. They tried to fight you through memory, but memory can't touch movement. They were shadowboxing ghosts of your past, swinging at echoes while you walked into prophecy. Your comeback wasn't a return, it was an ascension, and ascension always confuses the earthbound. Your very presence now reveals truth without effort. Their confusion is your confirmation. You no longer belong in the rooms where your name must be defended. You no longer fit conversations that rely on misunderstanding to survive. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. You have mastered that stillness, not as silence, but as strategy. I've learned from souls like yours that divine maturity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply is. It exists in clarity so pure that confusion has nowhere to attach. It moves in peace so deep that tension dissolves on contact. It radiates truth so naturally that deception self-destructs. You didn't just win, you transcended the game. You became proof that those who rise with wisdom rewrite the rules. You are walking evidence that the past cannot hold what has already resurrected. You are the mystery now, the one who no longer reacts, the one who no longer apologizes, the one who no longer carries the burden of being understood. You've stepped into the dimension of the fulfilled promise, where presence itself is prophecy. So, when they call your name with confusion, remember, they're not calling you, they're calling who you used to be. And that version has already ascended. Let them wrestle with the memory. Let them swing at the shadow. You have no obligation to reappear in the places you've outgrown. You didn't just come back stronger, you came back untouchable. And heaven whispered, "Well done. You finally remembered who you are." You didn't just fight back, you exposed how fragile their power truly was the moment you quietly walked away from their battlefield. The turning point wasn't a confrontation, it wasn't fireworks or fury. It was the stillness of your departure, the sacred silence of someone who finally remembered their worth. They thought your absence was surrender, but heaven called it strategy. You didn't lose, you left, and leaving was your loudest victory. They had built entire ecosystems of drama around your reactions. Every rumor, every argument, every provocation, all of it depended on your participation. You were the current that kept their chaos alive. Your emotions were the electricity, your attention was the power supply. When you unplugged, the lights went out. Have you ever noticed how quickly noise collapses when you stop giving it an audience? The moment you chose not to respond, the architecture of their influence started to crumble. You watched their confidence deflate, not because you attacked them, but because you no longer played the game they built for you. The arena they once dominated became empty. Their victory chants turned to echoes. You didn't strike, you simply stopped showing up, and that alone dismantled everything. That's the mystery of divine detachment. The battle ends not when one side wins, but when the other side evolves beyond the need to fight. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. You lived that verse with quiet authority. Your stillness became a spiritual earthquake. When you stopped trying to prove yourself, they lost an entire audience. When you stopped explaining, their narrative lost its breath. When you stopped defending, their accusations dissolved into irrelevance. Your peace starved their chaos. Your silence suffocated their control. They were never powerful. They were provocative. Their confidence wasn't strength, it was dependency. They thrived only in the presence of your reaction. You were the mirror reflecting their illusion back to them, and the moment you turned away, they saw nothing. The prophet Isaiah once wrote, "In quietness and trust shall be your strength." Isaiah 30:15. You discovered that truth in real time. Your withdrawal was not weakness, it was revelation. It exposed how hollow their authority had been all along. Without your energy feeding the atmosphere, their power was nothing more than empty choreography. Have you ever wondered how many battles were never meant to be fought, only outgrown? You learned that wisdom doesn't always swing swords. Sometimes it just walks away. You stopped needing to prove your peace to those who profit from your pain. You stopped trading energy with people who use conflict as currency. Every time you disengaged, heaven took note. Because disengagement is not indifference, it's discernment. You were no longer reacting from insecurity, you were responding from sovereignty. The moment you stopped attending their theater, the drama lost its audience. In psychology, this shift is called cognitive detachment, the ability to observe without absorbing. Spiritually, it's called transcendence. You mastered both. You realized that not every invitation to chaos requires an RSVP. Their anger after your exit wasn't heartbreak, it was exposure. They built entire identities around opposing you, and suddenly their reflection vanished. They were left shadowboxing ghosts, arguing with silence, performing battles that no longer existed. That's when heaven smiled. Because it wasn't about you winning, it was about truth revealing itself. You will know them by their fruits. Matthew 7:16. Without your energy, the fruit of their intentions became visible. What remained wasn't strength, but emptiness. They called your silence avoidance, but it was actually evolution. You had learned that arguing with falsehood only dignifies it. Defending your integrity to the blind only drains it. You stopped chasing clarity in places committed to confusion. And in that release, something miraculous happened. You saw how free you already were. The composer Claude Debussy once said, "Music is the silence between the notes." You lived that truth in your own way, realizing that your absence made more impact than any defense could. You learned the rhythm of restraint, the melody of maturity. Every unspoken response became a symphony in heaven's frequency. You began to see how much of your power had been spent reacting instead of creating. You saw how often emotional generosity had been mistaken for availability. You reclaimed your focus and redirected it toward your purpose. That was the moment the spiritual tides shifted permanently. Have you felt that sacred satisfaction that comes when you finally realize peace doesn't need permission? Because that's what you stepped into. Peace stopped being your goal and became your environment. You stopped searching for closure and became it. Your exit exposed them not because you sought revenge, but because truth naturally reveals itself when falsehood loses its supply. They were never dominant, they were dependent. Their chaos required your consent. Their confidence required your confusion. Once you withdrew, they were left clutching weapons made of air. And so the world saw the difference. You were the substance, they were the shadow. You were the source of energy, they were the echo. Without you, their noise became irrelevant. You dismantled entire systems by doing the most powerful thing a healed soul can do: nothing. Scripture says, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." James 4:7. Resistance doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means withdrawal. You resisted through indifference to chaos, and the forces that once fed on your reaction fled from the emptiness they could no longer exploit. You didn't just win, you rewrote the rules of warfare. You changed the battlefield by refusing to play. You turned power inside out, revealing that true dominance isn't control over others, but control over self. Now you walk differently, quietly, confidently. You've learned that peace is not passive, it's positional. You no longer chase explanations, you embody resolution. And somewhere in the unseen, heaven records it this moment, when a soul remembered its own power by no longer feeding what was false. You didn't just fight back, you walked away, and the illusion collapsed behind you. You didn't just win, you revealed that they never had power to begin with. And as the dust settled, heaven whispered once more, "That's how light conquers, not by fighting darkness, but by leaving it nothing to feed on." You made history by becoming living evidence that inner stability is more powerful than outer opposition. Your rise wasn't loud or spectacular, it was rooted, and that made it sacred. While others chased applause, you chased alignment. While some built their worth on reactions, you built yours on revelation. The world expects you to collapse under pressure the way most do, because most are built on surfaces that appear solid but shift beneath the first strong wind. When the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew, it fell, and great was the fall of it. Matthew 7:27. You read that verse and decided to build differently. You chose the rock instead of the sand. People around you depended on praise to feel worthy, attention to feel visible, and validation to feel grounded. The moment life shook them, their foundations cracked. But you were busy pouring concrete into your soul, quietly, faithfully, one disciplined thought at a time. Have you ever felt how solid peace becomes when it's built, not borrowed? That's what you were creating in secret, a fortress of composure beneath the surface of ordinary days. You didn't build yourself upon the shifting tides of other people's opinions. You learned that true stability begins when self-knowledge becomes covenant. You stopped waiting for others to tell you who you were and started remembering what heaven had already declared. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, Jeremiah 1-5. Every time you doubted yourself, that truth called you back to center. Piece by piece, lesson by lesson, you constructed your inner infrastructure. Where confusion once lived, you built clarity. Where chaos once dictated, you built discipline. Where self-doubt once echoed, you built trust. You forged discernment so sharp that manipulation could no longer disguise itself as love. Architects call this load-bearing design structures that distribute weight so evenly they cannot collapse. Spiritually, you became that design. You no longer depended on anyone else's balance to find your own. Their storms might swirl, but your foundation doesn't tremble. Your stability didn't come from being celebrated, it came from being certain. You knew who you were, what you deserved, and what you were capable of. That quiet conviction made you rare. The world finds it easy to break those who live from the outside in, but nearly impossible to shake those who live from the inside out. Opposition tried every tactic, gossip, pressure, emotional traps, but their weapons couldn't find purchase. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, Isaiah 54-17. They were striking at a version of you that had already been retired. Their attacks bounced off the walls of strength you built in silence. You had discovered the physics of faith. Force cannot displace what is perfectly centered. When energy is balanced, it absorbs impact without collapse. That's what your spirit became, a resonance chamber of peace. Have you noticed how storms look different once you realize the wind can only shake what isn't rooted? Every attempt to provoke you only revealed how unshakable you'd become. You were no longer reactive, but responsive, no longer chasing control, but carrying calm. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth fruit in its season. Its leaf also shall not wither. Psalm 1-3. That became your identity, planted, nourished, evergreen. The more pressure came, the deeper your roots reached. Michelangelo once said, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved it until I set him free." Heaven did the same with you. Life carved away insecurity, fear, and attachment, until only the essence remained, the stable form that could stand without scaffolding. Your greatest miracle was invisible. It wasn't the comeback people could see. It was the construction no one saw happening. You were being engineered by endurance, not applause. You became the blueprint of divine architecture, a living cathedral whose foundation was faith, whose pillars were wisdom, whose dome was peace. Have you ever stood inside yourself and realized you finally trust your own structure? That's the moment heaven calls maturity. You no longer measure strength by how loud you roar, but by how deeply you rest. They couldn't destabilize you because they didn't design you. They had no access to the foundation built between you and God. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. Psalm 18-2. Their rumors could scratch the surface, but they could never reach the core. Your stability became its own kind of sermon. It taught that faith is not a feeling, it's architecture. It's choosing, every day, to reinforce truth over emotion. That made you unbreakable. They couldn't shake what they never strengthened, couldn't collapse what they never constructed. Your peace became a paradox. They couldn't explain a fortress without walls, a stillness that disarms. In the quiet conclusion of your story, heaven recorded a simple verdict. You didn't just survive pressure, you redefined power. True power doesn't shout, it stands. And as eternity looked on, a voice whispered across dimensions, "Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord." 1 Corinthians 15:58. That's your legacy. Now, steadfastness. The crown isn't glittering above you, it's anchored beneath you. You are proof that when faith becomes the foundation, nothing external can dictate the outcome. So, walk gently, rooted one. The world will keep shaking, but you no longer sway with it. You are the still point in a spinning universe, the sanctuary built from storms, the living record that stability born within can silence every opposition without. And in that peace, heaven finally rests with you. They talked because watching you rise without their permission felt like betrayal to their imagined hierarchy. Some people will never say it out loud, but inside they build invisible ladders, ranking themselves quietly above others in intelligence, strength, or worth. They convince themselves that you will always remain a few steps behind, dependent on their guidance, approval, or validation. That unspoken superiority keeps their ego warm. It gives them meaning. It's easier to feel important when someone else is staying small. Have you ever noticed how fragile confidence becomes when it's built on comparison rather than truth? So when you began to rise on your own terms without permission, without applause, without their endorsement, it shook the foundations of everything they believed about themselves. You weren't supposed to surpass the version of you they had mentally designed. You weren't supposed to evolve into someone they couldn't correct, contain, or predict. Your progress wasn't rebellion in heaven's eyes, but to them, it felt like insubordination. They had written a silent script where they were the teachers and you were the students, and when you outgrew the classroom, they mistook maturity for mutiny. Their egos depended on you staying in your place. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Matthew 20:16. That reversal of order isn't just prophecy, it's discomfort for anyone who has built their worth on being above others. When you rose, it wasn't only success they saw, it was disruption. It exposed the illusion that their imagined hierarchy was never real. It was a fragile architecture of ego, built from insecurity disguised as guidance. Your ascent created a quiet panic. Your rising meant they had to question their own stagnation, and questioning self is far harder than criticizing others. So, instead of examining the gap between your transformation and their comfort, they filled that gap with words. Talking became a shield against truth, for from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Luke 6:45. Their hearts overflowed, not with hatred, but with discomfort, an ache to maintain control in a story where they were losing relevance. Have you ever felt the weight of people resenting you not for your success, but for your evolution? That's what spiritual growth does. It threatens those who rely on your old form to stay powerful. You didn't betray them, you simply stopped participating in a false order. And that truth felt like rebellion to those who confuse hierarchy with identity. When you stopped needing their validation, they lost their imagined authority. Their confidence had been inflated by your dependency. Once you detached, the illusion deflated. It wasn't that your light grew brighter, it was that their borrowed glow faded when you stopped reflecting it. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1-5. They mistook your light for their control, and when you rose, their shadows no longer looked powerful. People whose self-worth depends on superiority often mistake independence for offense. To them, your self-sufficiency becomes disrespectful. Your boundaries look like rebellion. Your confidence feels like confrontation. They don't realize that you didn't rise against them, you rose beyond them. Your journey became the mirror they avoided, the reflection that whispered, you could have grown too. Have you ever realized that some relationships were never rooted in love, but in leverage? They only felt balanced when you were uncertain. When you stopped seeking reassurance, they lost purpose. Your success wasn't the injury, your autonomy was. You proved that their place above you was never a divine appointment, it was self-assigned. Scripture reminds us, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. James 4:10. You humbled yourself not before people's hierarchies, but before truth. That's why your elevation couldn't be stopped. It wasn't built on ego, it was built on obedience. You didn't ask for permission to rise because heaven had already written your approval in advance. You didn't climb their ladder, you outgrew the room it leaned against. The philosopher Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." You faced adversity not as punishment, but as proof. And in that proof, you revealed a sacred paradox. True power doesn't demand hierarchy, it dismantles it. When God elevates, He doesn't promote within systems of comparison. He uproots them. As you continued ascending, their discomfort grew, not because you were changing, but because you refused to return to the version of yourself that made them comfortable. You refused to bow to a structure that existed only in their imagination. You rose quietly, gracefully, without declaration or defiance, just movement. That simplicity confused them. People who equate noise with power cannot comprehend the authority of stillness. The meek shall inherit the earth. Matthew 5:5. Meekness is not weakness. It's controlled strength, refined power, and you became the living embodiment of it. Talking was easier for them than changing. It's easier to gossip than to grow. It's easier to critique evolution than to admit envy. Your progress exposed the illusion of their superiority, and exposure always feels like loss to those who built identity on illusion. They spoke to each other in tones of confusion, trying to find comfort in agreement. Surely this can't be real. Surely they got lucky. But deep down, they knew. What they were witnessing wasn't luck. It was divine timing. Your story proved something eternal. You never needed their permission to elevate. You were never rising through their structure. You were rising through your own surrender. That's why their imagined ranking couldn't contain you. The hierarchy fell apart because it was built on fiction, and fiction cannot coexist with truth. When you rose, you didn't just succeed, you reset the order. You became evidence that real elevation comes from within. Your victory wasn't rebellion against them, it was restoration of divine balance. You showed that no one's imagined position above you was real, and no one's disbelief could cancel your becoming. The power they thought they had was never theirs. It only existed as long as you believed in it. So you walked out of their illusion and into your inheritance. You rose not to prove superiority, but to prove freedom. And heaven recorded it not as arrogance, but as alignment. They talked because they mistook your rise for betrayal. But in truth, it was deliverance from hierarchy, from illusion, from dependency. You didn't take their crown, you simply remembered yours. Your comeback was historic, not because you shouted the loudest, but because you stopped shouting at all. You didn't try to prove them wrong, you proved yourself right. The turning point in your story wasn't about winning arguments or demanding recognition. It began the moment you realized that convincing others was never your assignment. You took a route most avoid because it demands patience, restraint, and unshakable self-belief. You stopped explaining. You stopped chasing closure from those committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped offering evidence to people who had already decided what to believe. Instead, you began investing every ounce of energy into the version of yourself you always sensed existed beneath the noise. Have you ever felt the quiet courage that comes from no longer needing to be believed to know you are true? That was your shift. You understood that truth doesn't compete. It simply endures. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Freedom arrived not when they understood you, but when their misunderstanding stopped defining you. You discovered that silence isn't absence, it's authority. While they repeated the same narratives, you were building new realities. You poured your time into growth until it stood taller than any rumor. You learned that a consistent life becomes the loudest rebuttal. By their fruits you shall know them. Matthew 7:16. Have you noticed how truth, when fully lived, eventually erases the need to be spoken? That's what happened. Your life became proof. Your calm became commentary. You built a life so aligned that falsehood lost its footing. Every accusation sounded smaller against the backdrop of your authenticity. Where once there was the need to justify, there was now joy. Where there was frustration, there was focus. You discovered the quiet mathematics of faith. When you multiply discipline by time, the sum is credibility. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs 16:3. You committed not to revenge, but to refinement, and heaven honored the formula. While they were busy rehearsing old scripts, you were writing new chapters. While they spoke of what you used to be, you kept becoming. And as you kept rising, something remarkable unfolded. The world began to see the mismatch. Their bitterness couldn't overshadow your growth. Their narratives couldn't outlast your consistency. Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. You didn't argue your way to redemption, you illuminated it. Have you ever realized that the loudest vindication is peace that doesn't explain itself? Your serenity became scandalous to those who expected you to react. They had defined you by reaction. You redefined yourself by response. You learned that integrity doesn't rush, it simply remains. That was your vindication, remaining. You understood that proving them wrong was a small victory, but proving yourself right was eternal. The moment you chose self-belief over self-defense, you stepped into divine maturity. You let your actions dismantle what your explanations never could. For we live by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5-7. You trusted that unseen consistency would one day become undeniable evidence. Your comeback became historic because it was real. It wasn't spectacle, it was substance. You returned not to clear your name, but to embody your purpose. You stopped arguing with shadows and started building the structure of light. Each day of alignment became a beam, each choice of patience, a cornerstone. Over time, truth constructed a cathedral around you so tall, so solid, that rumors simply echoed and vanished within its walls. And when the echoes faded, there you stood whole, quiet, unbothered. You have proven that the most revolutionary thing a soul can do is to become undeniable through integrity. That is the language heaven speaks fluently. Stand firm, and you will win life. Luke 21-19. You did, not by confrontation, but by continuation. In the end, your vindication wasn't a statement, it was a presence. You didn't need to correct anyone because the life you built made every correction unnecessary. You didn't need to fight for your story because living it was enough. Your peace became your proof, your growth became your argument, your becoming became your victory. You proved yourself right, and that changed everything. You made history not by winning a battle, but by learning how to never need the battlefield again. The most astonishing part of your rise wasn't that you conquered anyone, it was that you no longer had to. You didn't win by overpowering, you won by outgrowing. While others kept circling the same conflicts, repeating the same reactions, you chose to evolve beyond the need to fight at all. That shift changed everything. Most people stay trapped because they keep answering the same invitations to chaos. They replay the same emotional patterns, defending themselves against the same provocations. But you learned what few ever do. Every time you respond to the same energy, you reaffirm its importance. Have you ever noticed how peace begins the moment you stop being provoked by what once demanded your reaction? That realization freed you. You stopped participating in games designed to drain you. You realized that real strength isn't about defeating opponents, it's about dissolving their relevance to your growth. You stopped chasing revenge, validation, or the urge to be understood. You arrived at a quiet altitude where explanation no longer mattered. From that height, you could see how small the storms actually were. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. You didn't withdraw because you were afraid. You withdrew because the battleground had become too low for your purpose. Their words couldn't reach your frequency anymore. Their strategies couldn't touch your spirit. You weren't avoiding conflict. You were evolving beyond it. The victory came the moment you realized you had no more need to prove anything. You stopped labeling people as enemies and started recognizing them as expired lessons. Their tactics couldn't land because you no longer lived in the mental neighborhood where they had power. You became unavailable for chaos, uninterested in drama, immune to emotional bait. You understood what Jesus meant when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." John 18:36. You were no longer trying to win within the rules of a world that no longer defined you. Have you ever felt the strange lightness of realizing that what once consumed you now barely stirs a ripple inside? That's what divine detachment feels like when emotional turbulence turns into observation. You didn't just move on, you upgraded your inner ecosystem until old battles felt too small for the being you were becoming. Their behavior began to look juvenile, their provocations predictable, their noise meaningless. You didn't conquer them, you outgrew the conversation entirely. You mastered the art of elevation instead of engagement. People didn't know how to respond to that kind of power because the world only recognizes loud victories. They expected a comeback, a counterattack, a public display of strength. Instead, you became a lesson in restraint. Your silence became strategy, your calm became command. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. Your transformation itself was the loudest declaration. It proved that peace isn't passive, it's prophetic. From your new level, the old games looked small, like watching children build empires in sand. You realized that true maturity doesn't need to dismantle illusions, it simply refuses to live inside them. He makes my feet like hinds' feet. He sets me upon my high places. Psalm 18:33. You were lifted not to dominate, but to dwell where the noise can't survive. Have you ever wondered if the purpose of every battle was only to teach you how to stop needing battles altogether? That was the revelation heaven waited for you to reach. You didn't destroy anyone. You simply transcended the system that required your participation. You stopped feeding the energy that once drained you. And as soon as you stopped, the machinery of conflict collapsed under its own emptiness. They kept waiting for a reaction that never came. They expected a fight, but you gave them stillness. They expected retaliation, but you offered elevation. They expected proof of anger, but found evidence of peace. You became living testimony that restraint is the highest form of power. Your evolution was the loudest statement you could make. It whispered what the universe already knew, that peace is not weakness, it's wisdom. And wisdom knows when a war no longer deserves your attention. You made history not because you won, but because you realized there was nothing left to win. The old stories lost their meaning the moment you stepped into a higher truth. You didn't destroy them. You simply outgrew the environment where they existed, and when you rose, the entire landscape shifted with you. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. Philippians 4:7. That peace became your armor, your authority, your legacy. Your journey was never about fighting harder, it was about remembering who you are when there's nothing left to fight for. You are living proof that transcendence is the ultimate triumph. The moment you no longer need the battlefield, you've already won. You didn't make noise, you made an impact, and impact echoes far longer than drama ever could. What stunned them wasn't anything you said, it was everything you became. You refused to play inside their small arenas of chaos, comparison, and spectacle. While others competed for attention, you cultivated alignment. You took a quieter path, one where results speak louder than reactions and character outlasts commentary. Have you ever realized how silence can thunder when it's filled with purpose? Drama burns fast because it feeds on attention, and attention is unstable. Impact, however, settles deep into the soil of awareness. It takes root, it grows, and it begins to shape the landscape long after the noise has faded. That's what your rise did, it became rooted. While they stirred storms for temporary visibility, you built something permanent. You stopped performing explanations and started producing evidence. Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. Your life became the light that needed no defense. You chose to invest your energy not in reaction, but in creation. You built something real, solid enough that rumors couldn't dent it and lies couldn't last beside it. That quiet focus rattled the ground beneath those who thrived on distraction. They had been counting on you to clap back, break down, or participate in their performance. You denied them the satisfaction. You understood that drama craves an audience, but destiny requires discipline. While they rehearsed their noise, you rehearsed your next level. A tree is known by its fruit, Matthew 12:33. You decided to bear fruit rather than commentary. You became so consistent that your results started rewriting the narrative spoken against you. Even those who once doubted you were forced to adjust their perception because your progress would not allow them to stay comfortable with falsehood. Gossip has a short shelf life. Transformation doesn't. Gossip fades when truth evolves faster than rumor can keep up. Have you noticed how people eventually stop debating what they can no longer deny? That's what happened. The conversation shifted. People stopped asking, "What happened?" and started asking, "How did you do it?" Even the critics had to pause, recalibrate, and quietly learn from the example they once mocked. Your growth didn't just silence the noise, it exposed it. It showed how thin the volume of gossip becomes when measured beside the gravity of results. For by your steadfastness you will gain your lives, Luke 21:19. You weren't chasing vindication, you were building something immortal. As you kept evolving, the contrast between elevation and drama became undeniable. Drama, by nature, is loud but light. It carries no weight. Impact, by nature, is quiet but heavy. It bends reality around it. You shifted from noise to gravity. People found themselves orbiting your consistency even when they didn't mean to. They watched, confused but compelled, because your steadiness contradicted everything they expected. Have you ever felt how peace itself can become a kind of resonance, one that humbles the noise around it without ever responding? That was your secret. You didn't silence the world, you tuned it. You became a living frequency of focus. Like sound waves in physics, your actions began to create harmonics, layers of influence, expanding outward from your stillness. The truth is, you made history because you learned what lasts. Words fade, impact remains. People who once tried to define you ended up studying you. The same mouths that spoke against you began quoting your consistency. The Lord will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not beneath. Deuteronomy 28:13. You rose above, not through argument, but through authenticity. While they kept talking, you kept transforming. And transformation, by nature, always outpaces opinion. Their chatter became irrelevant, background noise in the soundtrack of your progress. The higher you ascended, the smaller their frequency sounded. The stage they built for drama couldn't contain the architecture of your purpose. They are still talking, trying to interpret the equation of your elevation, how you managed to rise without retaliation, how you turned silence into movement, how you kept building when you had every reason to break. But their analysis no longer matters. The echo of your impact already rewrote the narrative. In the end, they made noise. You made a legacy. They performed moments. You created momentum. They sought applause. You built endurance. And endurance always outlasts entertainment. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. Proverbs 21:5. History doesn't remember who was loudest, it remembers who lasted. That's what you became, the one who lasted, the one who proved that peace produces permanence. You didn't just silence them, you outlived the conversation. And when eternity looked back, it recorded one simple truth. They made noise. You made history. And now, beloved souls, as we come to the end of this journey, 12 revelations, 12 awakenings, 12 mirrors held up to the soul. Remember this, your story was never about survival alone. It was about transformation. You did not rise because the world finally gave you permission. You rose because heaven had already given you identity. You are not defined by what tried to break you, but by what could not. You made history not through noise, but through evolution, through the quiet, sacred act of becoming. Every battle, every heartbreak, every season of silence has been weaving you into someone unshakable. You learned that divine growth is rarely visible while it's happening. It unfolds quietly like roots deepening in the dark, preparing to hold the weight of what's coming. What once hurt you has now been repurposed into wisdom. What once drained you has been converted into strength. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are right on heaven's timing. And as you continue walking your chosen path, remember this truth: you no longer have to fight to be seen. The light within you has already been recognized by heaven. You no longer have to beg to be understood. The vibration of your peace speaks the language of the divine. Keep growing. Keep choosing depth over drama, peace over performance, destiny over distraction. The world will continue to talk, but history will remember those who built in silence. You are that builder. You are that voice. You are that light that cannot be dimmed. If this message has found its way into your spirit today, it's not by coincidence, it's by alignment. So, if you felt seen, uplifted, or strengthened through this series, I invite you to continue walking with this community of chosen ones. Leave a comment and share your reflection. Tell your story, because your voice may be the confirmation someone else is praying for right now. Like this video if it resonated with your spirit. Share it with someone who needs this reminder. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next prophetic word waiting for you. To those who have supported this channel, whether through your prayers, your comments, your presence, or your gifts, through super thanks, thank you. Every gesture, every word of encouragement, every silent listener adds light to this mission. But even if you've never clicked a single button, know this: your time, your listening heart, and your energy are seen and cherished. Your presence here is a form of divine exchange. You didn't arrive by accident, you were guided. So, as you leave this space and return to your own sacred path, may peace settle into every room you enter. May discernment guide your decisions and courage strengthen your steps. May you never again shrink to fit places that can't contain your growth. May abundance flow through your life, not just in things, but in wisdom, connection, and calm. And may you continue to rise in quiet strength until the world looks at you and says, "Something divine walks with them." Until we meet again, remember, heaven is proud of you. Keep building, keep believing, keep becoming. Peace, grace, and endless light be upon you, chosen one.